Okay, so it's Mr. McTavish, and this is to-do list version 2. So the other day we did our to-do list, and we have all our code here. And what I've done is I've just created a new replit called to-do 2. And a little trick, just so that you know, is that if you do the replit, if you right-click home, you can open up multiple tabs, and it is an easy way to have access to all of your stuff. So there's the HTML from the previous one, and script. There's the script. So there's a lot of stuff here, and it's really important to take the time to read through it, make some slight changes, revisit it, and play with it. So couple key things here. So first off, I'm just going to set all my different items to have a bigger font size. So there we go. So if I run this now, I should get my box, and if I type in it milk, it will add, and there's my to-do list. So that's great. Items, and then I can delete them by just hitting delete. So the challenge was to change it. So we're going to try changing it. So we'll start with index.html. So what we wanted to do is, instead of just having the item, have a user, so we could assign a user. So we will do that. Now here is our input. So the simplest thing is that we're going to need to add a second input here. And again, it's text, same thing. And the idea is going to be user. Now, the problem, close that, is we're going to need a button. And so instead, before we were doing it on blur, well, now we need to make sure. So as you saw me type in here, when I remove the focus, and that's the blur event, and so what I'm doing is just clicking some blank screen so that it's no longer, the text box no longer has the focus. That's the blur event. So on blur, it's running the add to-do list. And what I'm doing is I'm changing that. So now it's going to run when I click the button instead. So I'm just going to get rid of that add to do. And if I run this now, I should still have the things. My button. Oops. Oh, and I made a little mistake here. Better remember the slash closes the item. I'm doing that for the inputs, but I'm not doing that for there. And I'll just add that to my list of tags that I want to have bigger. So there's add to do. So that's great. So the biggest thing is you got to be methodical. So the first thing is I'm going to need different input. So I've added the different input, and I've got it. It makes sense. To do item, and then down here, having a label for user. So there we go. And we'll just add some breaks, line breaks, just to tidy things up, make it look pretty. Even though this is on another line, if we force it to be a line break, we know it will be. Okay, so there we go. So we've got our things, and our form is now done. the big thing is that wherever we have our to-do, we're now going to need to add a user. So let's go into the script. So the biggest challenge here is right now everything is the to-do. So if I do Control F, what I'm going to do is anywhere where it's to-do, I am going to replace it with to-do 2. Now, the biggest thing is that I don't want to do it everywhere because I'm going to leave the web database like that. So I can't just do the quick, but that kind of thing I can replace. That one I want to skip. So those kinds of things I want to skip. Now, I've changed the name of the table, so that one I will replace. And this is all right. I'm just going to skip that. So it's a little tricky to do text. You got to spend some time. So I'm going to replace that. So the name of the table is now different. It's to do 2, and the column I'm going to leave as to do. So those things I'm going to keep. And so that's the name of the table. So I'm going to replace that. The to-do items will leave. So that's the row. That's good. So that's a table, so that I need to change. Okay, so we're good. So that's great. So let's break it down. So here is our web database. So that's fine. And here is where I open up the database. That is good. On the error message, I don't need to change anything there. If on success, I don't need to change anything there. Now here is where I need to change things. So create table. So in the create table function, I'm going to create an instance of my database and a transaction, and I am going to create a table if it exists, to do 2, so that's changed. So the ID column, that stays the same. To do column, that stays the same. So I need to add in here a user column, and it is text. So that's what I've just added in there, so that I now, the structure of this create table, in the brackets you have the columns, the ID column, the to-do column, now we have the user column, and the added on column. So we've got all of those things, so that's great. So adding to do here, we're going to have insert to do 2. So this is where I am going to need to insert the user as well. And so in our function name, I'm going to need to add the user text as well. So that's line 25. So we're going to come back to line 25. What I need to do is find every example of this. There it is. So that's where it adds. So I'm going to do the same thing. So I'm going to add a variable for the user. Document get element by ID user. And that's where it's pulling the value from the HTML, the user ID, so that's good. It's pulling it, and then in here, now I'm calling that add to do that I was just dealing with, and I'm going to get the user value from there. And what I'm going to do is same thing. I'm just going to clear that. So that's how that works. So let's just go back. Okay, so that's where we were, line 25. So I've added user text in here. So here's my database and the transaction, and I've created a variable for the added on date. And now here I'm going to insert. So this is where I need to add the user. You'll notice I'm never inserting the ID, and the reason I'm never inserting the ID is because it is a primary key. It's automatically generated because it's a primary key. So let's add a question mark there. And now so now my second value is my user. So that will be my user text, and then there's the added on. So that's what I'm doing. So now this adds that, so that's great. Let's go down to the next function, get all to-do items. So it's selecting everything, so that seems to be good. And it's going to call the render function, so that's good. Load the items. So these are all of the rows, so that should be fine. And then here, this is where the row. Okay, so this is a list item plus the row to do plus this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to slip in here just a space, and I'll put a user so we know that that's what it's putting in. And then I'm concatenating and adding row.user, and then adding that. So everything should be, if you look at this, so here's my list item, so that's where you get this little dot here. And then the row to do, so that read a book, that would be the to do item. Now I will have a space in the word user and which user it is. And then a square bracket and the hyperlink, which is my delete. So there's the hyperlink. And on click, it is going to run the delete to do and deleting based on the row ID. So that's great. So that should do that. Down here for deleting, all I need is my ID, so I don't need to worry about that. There's my initialize, and I think I'm done. So let's try running this. Cross your fingers. And there's my form. So to do item, get milk, and the user is McT. And you'll notice my other items are gone because it's now using the other table, which we didn't have access to before. And there we go. I've got the item. I can add another item, read a book. My friend Frank wants to do that, so I'm going to assign it to him. And there it is. And if I go, oh, I don't need to do that anymore, we can click delete. So it looks like it's good. I am going to post that onto GitHub. And that way you have access to it, and there'll be a link to this file. I encourage you to actually try to type it yourself and go through. It's really hard to do this kind of thing. So don't worry if you find it really difficult, but you have sample code, so take advantage of it. So create it with the sample code so that you've got that, how that works. And then look at the JavaScript, the W3 schools. If you look up SQL, you can see a lot of those things. So the select statement that we were talking about, you can actually see how that's done. And there's other ones that there's a ton in here. We barely scratched the surface. But the one thing I am going to mention is there is ways to delete. So delete rows, and down here, there's the drop table. So drop table will delete the table. So if you're having some issues, run the SQL to simply drop the table, and that can solve that problem. So and they just show the SQL. And if you look in our script, so there's the create table. So there's the SQL for that, and you would do something similar, but it would be drop table, and then the name of the table. So that is now posted on Replit. So github.com/ianmct/todo2. So you can access all of the code for this here. Have a great evening.